Hey everyone, it's Carl, and I want to talk today about another one of those things that you need to deal with as you're bringing in D&D players or players from similar type systems, even OSR and that sort of thing, is how do they wrap their head around the rule set? So I've done a video on hit points and wounds are different things. I've done a video on, how the damage system works. So we don't have armor class. We've got things like parry and then toughness. So all that stuff you can start working through and helping people understand. But one of the other things they bring to the table and they're curious about is, what's my alignment?
It's a savage world, strange as a weird war. It's a savage world, passage to explore. It's a savage world.
Hey everyone, it's Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do this stuff. Any support we get is going to get plowed right into cool products that we can talk about or learn from or whatever. But, significant others do not let you spend all your money on whatever you want, right? So let's talk about alignment. Savage Worlds does not have an alignment system. Now I know we now have Savage Worlds Pathfinder, which has this good, neutral, evil, and I'll try to address that a little bit later. But generally, in the core rules, Savage Worlds does not have an alignment. So why is alignment even there? Why? I don't know what was going on in Gary's head when he came up with it, but it really seems it's all about, because there's so much limitations into the number of skills, or there weren't any skills in AD&D first edition. There are very limited amount of things, attributes that define your character. So things like lawful good, chaotic evil, neutral, those sort of things seem to give a way of defining kind of that moral compass, how your character interacts with the world. So if you were lawful good, that meant the thing. It meant that you followed rules, you help the poor, whatever it is, it defines your character. And if you're chaotic evil, that defines your character. And it also gave this easy mechanism from a rule standpoint, or the way you think of things, is that I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy. I know fundamentally that creature is always going to be evil. Therefore, I can go in and cut them down with impunity, steal their stuff. That seems like why it was existing, but obviously the real world is much more nuanced. I firmly believe the character's actions are what define whether they're good or evil. And so even in like a Savage Worlds Pathfinder, where there is that good, neutral, evil, and things can be evil, I think personally I would still run it in that there's grayness there. So let's think about monsters. Let's think about Medusa, for example. A Medusa is evil, irredeemably evil, right? We go into a labyrinth, we're going to cut her down, take her out. That's what we do as adventurers. But then think about it. It could be much more interesting if, let's say, this Medusa is actually cursed and has chosen to live in the labyrinth as a way of trying to keep people away, because it's hard to find. It's a labyrinth. Maybe that'll keep them away. But they keep coming down because they got to take. Medusas are evil, but she's cursed. She doesn't want to hurt people, turn them to stone. She's only doing it because she has no other choice. Isn't that a much more interesting character, that instead of saying, well, we go in a dungeon, we're going to slice, kill everything and take her out, take the head, and that's the right thing to do because they're evil? Wouldn't it be much more interesting if there's some nuance to that? And then even if the characters, through their actions, they have to make these decisions. It isn't black and white. Is there something more to the story that's going on that we might then learn something, and then that'll lead to some other cool stuff later? So it's neat to think about, right? So getting that kind of defined, saying, alignments are rigid, they kind of put you in a box, but they're a way to develop your character's personality from a morality standpoint, or how they think about the world or interact with it. And then saying, well, other things should be more gray. There's not this fundamental good, evil, it's the actions they take. So how do we roll that into a game? And I think a lot of games try to do this, but I'm a Savage Worlds guy, so I'm going to talk about Savage Worlds. And the big fundamental item is hindrances. Hindrances is a big deal. It wasn't in the first edition of D&D. It just wasn't an idea. Again, the box defined kind of how you should act. hindrances in Savage Worlds are those characteristics. Sometimes they're flaws. Sometimes there's just more how you interact with the world. They give that player a chance to build a player character out that has some interesting things about them that kind of define their morality. You know, you can have the hindrance where you are heroic, and that shows people, or that defines how your character interacts with the world. They may have a vow. They may have, even some interesting stuff like, if they're greedy, if they're bloodthirsty, even if they have a death wish. All those things can lead to this person acts more evil. They act kind of like they're neutral with the world. They don't care one way or the other. They're staying out of it, or they're good guys because that's how they act. It's not all hindrances. Obviously, there's role play to go, and let the players define their actions in the game, define whether they're a good or bad person. Right? That's how it should be. Because I guess in D&D, at least in first edition, if you broke your alignment, bad things could happen. Okay, but no one is perfect, right? So I don't know. When I was a kid, we were playing the game. We always had this thing where like the lawful good paladin, because everybody wanted that because the stats had to be really high to get it, and if you had it, it was like awesome. But then the parties became, what do people like, goody two shoes or whatever, and for them to do something a little off color, suddenly the paladin decided he's going to go down this other corridor, and gone when the people need to do something that's a little, more neutral or a little more evil, but the characters wanted to do that. I mean, no one says that a paladin can't make some decisions that are a little gray because it makes sense to the character and there's some growth there. And I don't know if the god's just going to strip you of everything. I guess that's going to be dependent on your game, right? So hindrances help to really define the character, and then the actions are what make the character that good or evil. And there's even some games, not Savage Worlds, that track that, right? The Star Wars, the path of the light, the path of the dark side, and you kind of move between them as you're interacting with the world. So hindrance is a big part. Obviously, the way you role play is a big part. And now you start thinking about, well, what about things like Savage Worlds Pathfinder, which has that good, neutral, evil? Well, when I look at it, it's really, at least for me, it's really defining a way of representing some mechanical stuff. Again, there's good, there's evil, and so you can identify evil through powers. You can protect yourself from evil through powers, or you're going to create a weapon that has a power against good or evil or is cursed. Okay, I mean, I get that. But what if we don't make it so black and white? What if we say it's defined by these actions? So in my mind, let's say there's a prince and it's a good guy, right? Head of the state, does some really great stuff for the community. If you cast that power that said, is he evil? No, he's not evil. He's a great guy. But then let's say he changes over time. He finds a desire, he gets more greedy, whatever it is, and he turns evil. Well, now, you may find he's evil with these powers or whatever. And if he decides ultimately that you're a threat and he's going after you, now you can protect yourself with those same spells. And there may be creatures you think are bad and you're going to kind of protect yourself from them, but it doesn't work because they're really not bad. They're just protecting themselves from an invader or something like that. So it makes it so much more interesting without that it no longer has to be the surprise. You had magic that was keeping your powers from noticing he was a good or bad guy or whatever. You don't need that anymore because people change over time. How they interact with the world changes over time. And obviously, the players can change over time. So like I said, morality is defined by your actions and kind of how you perceive the world and how the world perceives what you're doing. And hindrances give you that option to build out some much more interesting flavor to your character. You can use hindrances in a variety of ways that kind of define, things like bloodthirsty. Well, what does that really mean as you interact with the world? It doesn't have to be black and white. It can, how do you role play and how do you do it? So anyway, that's my thoughts on it. So as I try to bring D&D players into the fold, and that question comes up, it's like, you don't need it. You've got player agency, right? Your character can be what you want. Define the hindrances that make sense to you that you want to play, define how you're going to play them, and then interact with the world, good, bad, indifferent, and then the world will interact with you. And someday somebody may hit you with a sword that only hits evil people because you know what? You're actually evil. So Carl again with Tabletop Tango, thank you for watching. See the bubbles, do the stuff, and we'll catch you next time.
It's a savage world. Strangers are weird.